Hey guys, give us a shout out if you guys can hear us and see us.
All right, lots of likes
We
coming.
can.
So they can.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Happy World Product Day, everyone. Really good to have everyone here. Just to quickly start this off, I'm Sid. I lead the enterprise business for India and Southeast Asia at Amplitude, and I've been working with building this, unconventional geeks community with my partner in crime, Utkarsh. And we've been trying to essentially get a lot of fantastic speakers like John here and Ujjwal to sort of come and talk to us about product and all the other things around it. Just to quickly introduce our folks here, we've got John Cutler, who is a product evangelist at Amplitude. He's a well-known product coach and helps teams make shifts from thinking about data to actually using it and making it an integral part of their product process. And in his early days, he was a game developer as well as a touring musician, playing bass guitar, if I know that correctly.
A mix.
Um,
Yeah, a mix. Depends. I was not the lead singer. Let's put it that way.
Awesome. And then we've also got Ujjwal here, who's a senior product leader at MoveInSync. He's a techie turned PM and comes with 15 years of experience building products like Coupon Dunia and MoveInSync. So yeah, the floor is all your guys. Looking forward to the session, and let's get the show on the road.
Thanks,
All
Sid.
right. So good. To start this session. Welcome, John, to India. So we've got a lot of awesome, product leaders out here. A lot of familiar faces. Some of them are, of course, new people that I have not known, but a lot of So I can tell you from a lot of good product geeks, product leaders from the startup ecosystem are here to hear you. So yeah, thanks for joining in, and so good to be starting some sort of different kind of chat, which is around music, around poetry, around products. And let's hope that it also so we're trying to have some fun, guys, and we are hoping that it turns some bit insightful for you guys as well. So yeah, John, I mean, everyone, of course, knows you, follows you. Why don't you start with telling us a little bit about your journey?
Sure.
From being a musician to becoming a product evangelist today. So yeah, tell us 2-3 minutes of that, and then I'll shoot questions that I have.
Sure. I'll try to compress it into a couple minutes. It's certainly been a journey. I was pretty impatient when I was in college and was excited. I made the mistake of going to university in New York City, which was a mistake. I'm the type of person who should have gone to university not in New York City. But I got very distracted and I left college. I went to I lived in Egypt for a year, and then I came back to try to go to university again. And then I officially left university to start a business. And I was pretty impatient. I wanted to build things. I wanted to make things. If I have a son now, and I would definitely not suggest that he does this, but I took a lot of risks then, and got involved in building things and businesses. But one of my real passions from when I was a lot younger too was playing music, and I had these things often happen in very surprise, accidental ways. So I had a friend who was had been doing his music and was signed to a major label, which at that time was a big deal. Now signing to a major label has problems associated with, but it was a big deal at the time. And that started a whole adventure. I was doing my thing and he offered, why don't you come and play with us and do this? And this started a whole adventure for almost, 10 years of playing and touring. and also doing my own, when I say my own music, you know, I was playing with that band and playing with other bands and living in New York and sometimes living in a van and going out and doing these things. So I got a relatively late start to product, you know, pushing into my early 30s, when my, you know, in between tours, I used to go and do contract work in tech in the summer, you know, when we weren't touring. And so I made the shift, you know, back when we were doing less of the music to doing more of that. And so I had then a progression of product roles and, you know, business analyst roles, product roles, UX research roles. And that brings us up until today. So it was a pretty, it was an adventurous time for exploring what I wanted to do in life, but it took the better part of my 20s to get that stuff out of my system. I still obviously really like music and like writing music and like writing songs, and which is kind of like poetry as well. So yeah, I don't know if that's the snapshot in a couple minutes.
Sure, amazing. I mean, that's. I think those are the kind of journeys that bring in a lot of different flavors from different places, and makes a nice potpourri. You know, a different personality, a different thought process. So yeah. I mean, let me start with the kind of questions that probably more people are looking to hear. um, so, okay, product management, they say, is both art and science. Everyone talks about science. So let's talk a bit about the art part of it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's certainly been the track that I've taken into it. I mean, I've come to, maybe I downplay my sort of technical background or my, you know, my interest in wrangling data and the measurement side of it. I do very much appreciate that side of it. It's actually been a surprise to people at Amplitude. You know, they hear my talks. It's about, you know, culture and growth mindset and psychological safety. And they actually had to tap me on the shoulder when I was joining Amplitude and said, "You do care about data also, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. You know, this is the tool. I care about it so much that I don't talk about it all the time. You know, it's just how we work and how we do our thing." But what's always appealed to me, and I believe is the overlap, is you're working with a group of just really creative problem solvers, and people who are passionate about what they're doing and are quirky and have their differences in you know, how they approach problems, how they approach what they're doing. And that's what's always really drawn me to product management, is this idea that we're creating something together, you know. And that's and that there's a lot of risk involved too. You know, the same thing with music, you know, that there's lots of ways that you can go wrong, and you do go wrong over time. So I think that's you know, you mentioned that the art side of it, I think it's more the sort of humanity side of it, right? The connections that you build between people. And I would say that as a product manager, some of my favorite moments in my life have been, you know, sitting there in front of a problem with engineers and designers together and sort of thinking about it and trying things and having a spirited debate about it, and then focusing ourselves and then trying to think about how to solve that particular problem. Those are the moments that really get me excited, which is kind of funny. You know, there's a lot of things in popular writing about product management about, you know, directly responsible individual and product manager is the CEO of the product. And the reason why I kind of resent or regret all those, or just don't really buy into all that, is that I just always think back to working alongside this creative group of people trying to do this. And if you've ever recorded a record, you know, you can spend weeks. Basically, I recorded a record where we spent days and days and days and days locked into a studio, and you're sitting there, you know, and there's machines and computers, and you've also got organic instruments, and you're trying to figure out this problem together. Uh, that's not a directly responsible individual environment. You know, that's a very fluid, creative environment. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's what I see, is that's what drew me to this problem solving thing that I was doing. The technical and the scientific side of it, I see as kind of the tools of the trade. But what we're trying to do is to have impact with our product and, you know, change the world or change our communities or do cool stuff that benefits everyone. So that's my take on it, at least.
Right, right. So, I mean, you mentioned, the creative process, and we will deep dive into it in a little bit about how you jam to create new things, and how do you relate that with product management. But before that, one of the questions that I wanted to ask is that product management in the years, like after I picked it up 7-8 years back, has matured a lot, right?
Right.
And a lot of people are now talking about it, articulating things really, really well, and giving a lot of clarity. But probably when you started, it wasn't so. So how did you pick up the basics of it, and how did your sort of music experience play a role in it?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I think that the mid 2000s, at some point, you could probably throw, in New York, in different companies, you could probably throw a ball out the window and hit someone who was doing something similar to what we would call product management today, but it may or may not have been called that in that role. And so I think that it's actually an interesting thing, because when I see junior product managers now, it's much more stable and evolved. It's funny, I lived in San Francisco for a year, and I commuted back and forth between there and Los Angeles, and I lived with a group of a lot of younger people, and they were all studying the books about how to pass the Google product manager interview. And the irony at the point is, for fun, actually, I went and tried to take the Facebook product manager interview, and I was sitting in the interview, and I was like, this is just so silly. I couldn't actually be successful at this interview, yet I was coaching these junior people. I said, just read the book. I went and did the Facebook thing. You just have to read the book and you'll pass the interview. It's really easy to do the thing. And so I think where I'm going with that is that, a lot of junior people get involved now, and it's very sort of formulaic. You do X, Y, and Z, and you can become associate product manager, and then you can become a product manager, and there's roles and senior or whatever. But in the mid 2000s or whatever, you learned by getting involved in all sorts of parts of the process. Ranging from the technical side to marketing, to business analyst roles, to UX. A lot of product managers just happen to be the quote unquote UX person, because that's all you had. So now I know enough. Don't get me anywhere near Figma or InDesign or anything like that. I don't have anything to do with that, because that's what is funny part of the Facebook interview. They said, I want you to start sketching now, this thing. And I actually said to the Facebook interviewer, I said, well, the first thing I do, because I'm here at Facebook, is I work with the best designers in the world. Like, I'm not gonna draw anything. That would be stupid. Like, why? I mean, I can draw for fun if you want, but that would just be me guessing at this interface. That's not how we want to do it. And they kind of laughed very subtly, but I could tell they were not having a good time doing the interview, right? So back to this thing is, I think that now, when I give advice to younger people interested in product management, I just tell them to pick an area and go deep in a couple areas that you want to get into. And if that means go deep into the quote unquote business side, maybe, try customer success or some other element of that. Or if you want to go into the engineering side, get involved with there. Or if you want to get involved in the UX side or various relates, go deep for a couple years and just be on a team and do the day in, day out work that's involved in making this work, and to build your interest. Maybe you don't want to be a product manager. Maybe you want to be involved more in design. Maybe you want to be involved in a different area. So I don't know if that's the advice people want to hear, but I think that with the maturity of the field also comes, people tracking themselves down, the runway. Like those people I was living with in San Francisco, they were mining Bitcoin at night and then trying to pass the Facebook product manager interview by day. And that's certainly one way you can do it. But I would encourage people to try to get a little bit more diverse experience in the beginning and see, because you're going to be doing this for the next 20, 30 years of your life. So you might as well pick the environment you want to be in after trying it a little bit, would be my advice.
Sure. All right. All right. So, but is there, could you remember there was would there be a certain skill that kind of helped you during your course as a PM or as a UX designer? where you thought, oh, this is almost like, creating music. So
Absolutely. And I would say that there's an element of when you're making music or when you're doing product stuff too, there's this element of traveling up and down the sort of problem solution space. And it's very, very hard to describe because it's also a very collaborative activity. But you're thinking about the song or the show, or you're doing this thing and you're thinking about the broad arcs, about the things, and then you have to zero down to get super into the weeds. Are we playing this chord correctly? Or is this part of the song what we want it to be? And you're sitting there, maybe if you're recording, you're getting very, very detailed. But the number one thing I work with junior product managers on is this skill of, it's almost like an athletic gymnastic mental skill, if I can describe it. And it's similar between music and other problem solving. The joke that I say is that as a product manager, the minute you get detailed, someone will walk into the room and say, "What's the big picture?" The minute you walk in with a big picture, someone will say, "What are the small details?" If you're in the middle, someone will say, "We need the big picture and we need the small details." You never can win. And it's actually very, very similar to music or other creative things. I remember one day we were in the studio for 6 hours recording this dumb little part, and we wanted to try to get it perfect. And we were sitting there, and someone had to say, "Wait a second, what are we doing here? Like, this is 3 seconds of one of our songs. Like, this is insanity. We've been playing this over and over again. We played it 200 times now. This is crazy." And like, what's the big picture? We want a song. We want to communicate this message. We have a message with this song. We want an excitement of this live feel here. So that is the same thing, right? Like, you have to bump yourself up and then go down into problems. And if you can master that as a product manager, that kind of gymnastic ability, that's really, that and communication are 60 to 80% of being a product manager. And people don't realize that. They pick up other areas, but that's what I would say is common between those disciplines. Really, it's a hard thing to describe, but I call it like chunking, or decomposition, or big picture, little picture type work. And you have to build that muscle again and again and again.
right. Yep, insightful. So, while we are at it, and because you've mentioned it a couple of times, so I mean, so creating music is a lot, cacophonic, activity. If you've, for the audience, like if you've heard any sessions where people are trying to jam something or create some music, I can tell you, I've been part of such sessions, so I can tell you that it is, from a person outside the room, it's cacophony. So it's
Absolutely.
it looks like what is going on? Are these guys musicians or what? Are they learning? So so from there, and then the outcome, the beautiful piece that you want to listen over and over, and it's pleasing to your ears, is a very painful journey. So my question is, how do you and everyone in the room is different. The drummer has a different language. The person on the keyboard has a different language. The different sounds. How do you piece them together, and what does it tell us about stakeholder management? And while
Oh, interesting. Well,
so,
actually, we could go very, yeah, it's super important. The funny thing is, there's many music analogies that have we could go very, very deep into that, right? Like, if you a lot of people, for example, jazz is a great example. Once you learn the language of jazz, you can see a very highly simplified framework for a song, and any jazz musicians in the world can get together. And once they've elevated themselves to a certain language, understanding of that language, they can, they can follow through. And most of these tunes that are accessible to them, you can actually buy a book called, it's the Fake Book, and the Fake Book has 1,000 of all the popular jazz songs. And if you get a group of jazz musicians together, they open up to any page, suddenly they can make music. And the people you see in your local bar who seem like they've got it all figured out have just learned this language, and they can riff on it. Now, interestingly, if you think about big band or if you think about more scripted thing, that needs to, there's still a whole language, but often that's much more scripted. So sometimes I hear the analogy of product manager as sort of a conductor or things, and I get all anxious. I'm saying, well, are you talking about conducting classical music? Are you talking about conducting a jazz band? Small ensembles don't need a conductor. You're playing off each other in these particular things. So I could go forever on the music analogies, but back to the thing, the stakeholder management. The thing that resonates with me is that you can have your functional area, your functional knowledge, like a drummer understands minute things. Like a drummer understands that if you lag the beat just a little bit, it's going to create a momentum in the song. And it's an art, and they understand it. Now we all feel it. So it's similar to, like, for example, design or other things. Like there's very, very subtle things that you can do. But in product, the interesting thing is not everyone's good at explaining it, nor can you really explain it. You ask a drummer to explain what lagging the beat or dropping the beat back a little bit or even accelerating the beat. If you're ahead of the beat, it actually creates attention to the thing. The drummer sounds crazy. It sounds crazy. So the first thing that resonated with me once you described it is that there is this challenge of people with their respective sort of functional skills who also understand a common language that need to work together. And the funny part is Amy Edmondson has this idea of professional culture clash. And she's this Harvard professor, and she talks about psychological safety. And she coined a term called professional culture clash, which is about what happens when you get people of different sort of backgrounds working together. And that is the challenge really of product, is you have a lot of strong-minded people who understand the nuances in their particular area, learning to collaborate, but who also understand a common language to do those things. So the answer, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending how you look on it, is that there's no absolute silver bullet to creating those things. It takes professional empathy. You have to be able to go in as a product manager and assume you do not know, assume that the people there are talking a language that you don't necessarily understand, that you can help them verbalize, really. And you also have to create kind of creative disruption in terms of how you collaborate with the stakeholders. If everything is a highly, highly structured meeting and that you force convergence very, very early, it would be like a bunch of musicians saying, okay, practice for 5 minutes. And once you get it, we're going to go into the road and show, play the song. You have to let it be messy for a period of time. So we could talk forever about the analogies, but hopefully we've explored it. But I'd say the themes are a common language, professionals, nuances by discipline, and then the need to be able to kind of work with that creative professional tension to create positive things to happen for your particular product and for your particular thing. And if you go in, a lot of junior PMs who've only sort of went to graduate school and a consulting background, I believe they struggle because in their structured world of business school and things like that, things just happen, things just work. You do a quadrant diagram, everything's up and to the right. Why isn't the team executing? I don't understand this thing. And that's almost like a drummer who's never played with anyone arriving at the jam session with a bunch of jazz musicians and saying, I just read in a book that all you need to do is drum on the beat and doing these things. And all the people are sitting around saying, like, what are you doing? What are you don't understand us. So hopefully, I think there's so much to explore there, but this professional culture clash is really what it's at.
I hear you, and I'm sure a lot of senior product managers out here and product leads can hear you too. So yeah, I think that is always a challenge. So again, switching away from the analogies right now, I'm in a more product question. So
Yeah.
I've struggled in my initial days, 5-6 years back. I struggled a bit with dealing with UX designers. I was a techie, so I didn't have much, much issues with the techies actually, because I could talk their language, and I have some, I don't know, natural understanding for business and marketing guys. So I was able to understand with, have a good understanding with them as well. But I had this little struggle initially with the UX, which I could do away with by reading a few books and maybe learning some bit of their language. But the question to you is, which kind of stakeholder, sales, marketing, and there's so many others who come from very, very vivid backgrounds. Which ones did you have challenge with early on, and how did you
Oh, interesting.
cope with it?
Yeah, my bias is strange. Like when I show up, it's typically I form a pretty deep immediate connection with with designers and engineers, but both of them. And interestingly, I've noticed in the last year or two or three, it's much more common for the engineers and designers to hate their product manager than it is for the designers to hate the product manager and the engineers to hate the product manager separately. It's like there's more in common between the designers and the engineers than the other thing. Maybe it's a regional thing in the world, and maybe this is happening at a different pace, but so I think the stakeholders that I had trouble with at first were generally kind of business types who didn't really understand the nuances of product development. Or a great example is like if you're an executive and you've never seen a usability testing session, for example, there's no way for you to fathom how wrong you can be. And I asked on Twitter recently how, has your CEO ever attended a usability testing thing? And I think only 10% said, or 20%, or some crazy low number that asked that particular thing. So the challenge that I had with the stakeholders were sort of, and I think this is pretty common, so I wouldn't say it's unique in that sense, where the people who would just sort of say, well, don't overanalyze this. We just got to build this thing, or if we could just, we need more predictability in product development, or just these kind of big statements. The classic one would be, we need better estimates. And I'd say, well, let's just do less. What do you mean we need better estimates? I was like, yeah, if you want better estimates, just do less. There's no such thing as better estimates. You just have to do less and you can get more predictability. So it's this kind of like tension between the people in the business who are extremely skilled at other things. And I'm not denying how skilled they are at some other things, but it's building that respect, because I don't think that they realized that I had run businesses too. So there was building a connection. And there was also me empathizing with their world. Anyone who's done sales or done anything or been the founder of a company knows just how hard that is. It's so incredibly difficult. And then the number one thing, the challenge is, again, it's back to what we were talking about before about the drummer trying to explain something that sounds crazy, is that there's almost a point where logic doesn't work. You really have to show, not tell, or find a common model with that person to explain what you're doing. So I found the biggest connections with the doers, and I usually had to work the most at trying to, hold my tongue a little bit when you'd hear a business person just say something like that, like, how hard can it be? Or I always have these phrases. One is, whenever you hear, while we're at it, why don't we? Your ears should go like, it's while we're at it, why don't we? We're in trouble now. Or how hard could it be? Or this is a solved problem. Those little triggers, if any, we can all relate to them, right? Like they fire off our neurons that go to it.
I could imagine all of these are global. so
Well, and we could come up with the same things with music. Like, the lead singer would be like, can't we just slow this one down a little bit? Or the lead singer would be like, everyone, like, I need more in my monitors. It's like the lead singer always wants, and I need more of myself in the monitors. And if you're a sound guy, you're like, okay, if I turn it up, it's going to feed back. And they're like, no, I need more. And you turn it up, and of course it feeds back. And then they go, so it's back to the same language, the same language barriers in some ways.
Absolutely. All right.
This is water, by the way. I'm getting excited by the conversation, but I'm not like classic US, 5 lattes in one thing, and we're drinking water now. So.
All right. Thanks for see everyone's. All right. I think it's a great, Airmeets is a good platform. I'm loving it. So it's a good way to, engage the speakers and audience at the same time. All right. So All right. So one thing, I mean, a personal observation is that I've observed that a lot of beautiful in our mind, a lot of beautiful compositions,
Hmm.
the best ones, do not connect so well with the
Mm.
audience, right?
Yep.
You feel great about them, but then they do not connect, and then there are those rather simple, ignored ones that just win them over, and you're like, what's going on? Some sort of mental model that I get is that great isn't equal to popular. Thoughts
Right.
on that?
Oh, geez. The great example is, the great Neil Peart, um, that passed away recently. So if you're into like drumming and you think about Rush, right? Now, people connect so deeply with the technicality of that particular drumming, and so that was like people, if you talk to like music nerds about music, they'd be like, oh, this Rush song, it's crazy at that. Now if you play that for your boyfriend or girlfriend, they'd be like, what is going on in that song? They're singing about dragons, they're singing about like this other like mystical layer. Yes is another band like that, or these really sort of nerdy math rock bands, or other things. But if you play it for sort of a quote unquote normal person, they'll say, well, I don't understand what that's about. If you show them the video, they say, well, that guy has a huge drum set, right? So that's pretty cool to do the thing. Um so so I think that here's what I would say with the product stuff, and it's actually why I like working at Amplitude and helping teams, is that I think people, musicians as well, connect very deeply with connecting with the audience. And I remember when we were playing a lot of music and we were working on some new songs, and we had a song that everyone's like, oh my God, that's so cheesy, how, oh, this is, we're gonna, and remember, you have to play it. Oh, I'll give you the example. I don't know if anyone remembers the song "Walk on the Ocean." There's a band called Toad the Wet Sprocket, and they had a song called "Walk on the Ocean." So we toured with Toad the Wet Sprocket. So I had to hear "Walk on the Ocean" every night for like 50 plus days or 70 days in a row. And so "Walk on the Ocean" is a really good song if you do it, if you get into it. Now, they had to play it every night for the last 75 days, so they started to hate it. But back to the particular example, is I think impact rules the day. I've seen a lot of stubborn musicians get extremely like, oh, this song sucks. And then they play it out live, and people really connect with it, and they have the quote unquote data that people are connecting with it. And then suddenly, just like, Toad the Wet Sprocket loves playing that song, as a musician, you start to play with that song. So I think that really, once you get out of the studio and once you get in front of people and you connect with people, just like once your product gets out there into the world and you start connecting with people, when you see that it has an impact in their life and that they connect with it, I think a lot of your prior notions about quality and what you do has a lot to do. It's funny because I mentioned the word quality. um, I think there's a huge difference between quality that the craftspeople feel good about with their product, and then obsessing for a whole year over every little thing that doesn't necessarily have impact for the user. And the same thing, back to your analogy with songs, you could spend forever trying to get every little thing, but if you're not connecting with people, it's good. I know that was a long answer to a short question, but it brought back a lot of memories of doing that tour with the Wet Sprocket and having to hear that song every night for 75 days or whatever.
Wow. All right, so there are a few questions coming in from the audience, and I'll take some of them up. Yes, Naz is asking, whenever I talk off the book and first principles in a PM interview, a lot of times the interviewer thinks that this person doesn't know PM work, because I'm not talking
Hmm.
about a specific framework.
Hmm.
So how do you stand out while sticking to the book?
Oh, interesting. So if I'm understanding the question, is that we're bombarded by frameworks, and a lot of these, especially interviews, are just talking internally. Like people put a lot of emphasis on frameworks, but if you take a first principles approach, you can almost abstract away a lot of the frameworks. That's all the basic concept, and to do those things. I've sort of come to peace with what has worked for me, and what I've noticed in interviews when someone is really nailing it, is that you can tell when they're over reliant on one particular framework versus when they're using the framework as an accessible medium to explain the thing. A good example is at Amplitude, we do this North Star framework. I'm funny at Amplitude. I say, well, there's nothing really unique about this. You guys understand that, right? People are like, I totally understand, John, but can you do another North Star workshop? Because everyone gets it, right? And so I think it's a good example of you need to master. It's almost like some martial art, right? Like knowing the frameworks exist. At first, we don't know the frameworks exist. Then we know the frameworks exist. And then we be able to begin to mix and match the frameworks and almost be able to describe the meta framework. And so I know this is a long answer to that, but what you're trying to look for in your PM career is all this talk about first principles is great, but you know what? If I ask 10 people in Silicon Valley what their first principles are, they actually have pretty different first principles. So apparently they aren't first principles, right? So you need to make first principles accessible. And I think you need to embrace the fact that certain frameworks do that. So what I'll do, for example, is instead of jumping into first principles, I'll say, well, one framework we could use is North Star framework. North Star framework's helpful because it helps us expose our beliefs. It explores leading and lagging indicators, inputs and outputs, and the idea that you can make decisions over years to improve the success of your product. And if I hear in an interview someone explain it that way back to me, I instantly know that at which level that they're operating. So I don't know if it answers it. I think that you need to master the ability of accessibility into the work. You can't hold frameworks as the be all end all. And you can't go into an interview with a company and say, actually, I don't use that framework. I'm only first principles. Like you're never gonna win friends that way if you do that. So hopefully that helped.
That's insightful. I guess that's a great insight there. Another cool question coming in from Pallav is that you made quite a switch going from music to UX designer to PMing. Do you have a framework for your career? How do you decide which career opportunities to go after?
I don't. I mean, a dirty secret for me is, I'm in awe of these people who, growth hacking their career, design their career, have their check boxes and, do their bullet journals and do the introspection. And I guess I do a little meditation and I do a little bit of that, but I not like some of these people do these things. So I've been letting it, I've been just sort of going. I'll tell you, my philosophy over the last 5 years is to just give, and something will come out of it. And that's meant with my writing and Twitter and things. It's like I just assume that if you put it out there, and this is bad product, right? It's almost saying like if you ship it, they will come. But I actually think that with writing and with your sort of career and things like that, like if you give and if you connect, and if you do it from a selfless kind of place, and if you just keep it going, don't quit after 1 month or whatever. If you do it for you and people happen to like it, then you can, it works over a period of time. And actually that's very similar to music, right? Like you can't, if you're sitting there expecting to, become a rock star, especially in music today, you're very much deluding yourself about what's going to do. Like, do you love it? We can share music now digitally. It's amazing. Are you making music? Are you sharing music to do those things? So I'm not the best person to give a very structured framework for career. And frankly, I've made a bunch of mistakes and got a pretty late start at this. So I'm not necessarily a good model to, when I give people advice in their mid-20s, I give them very different advice. Don't make a vision quest and then come back and take 10 years to do this. Like you could save yourself some time.
Right. So yeah, I think my mantra has been, just love what just do what you love to do, and you get you start getting those kind of opportunities that you kind of look for or you want to do more of. And I think that has sort of worked, And I think
your
that's
team notices. Your team notices too. I've noticed a lot of people who you can tell in their mind they made a mistake. They think they made a mistake to go into product management, or it was an accidental product manager. Now, like, the money is decent for them, but you can see it in their eyes. They don't like really love this thing. They don't get excited about this mess that we're talking about. And your team will notice if that's not where your sort of happy place is to be doing it. And I think actually it means that a lot of teams disengage with their product manager because their product manager is not in that mental space to do it. So the advice you give there, Ujjwal, is extremely good. Like, you have to be comfortable with what you're doing here, because burnout is a real problem with music and for product management, if you're doing it.
Sure. So there's a very pertinent question here from Joel, who's been a gamer, game developer himself. So
Oh, cool.
he's asking, when making any creative work like music, if you spend enough time creating a piece of music, you'll get accustomed to it, like it more than a person who is hearing it for the first time. So there's
Right.
this bias that gets developed. So
Yeah.
is there a way a band can keep their ears fresh?
Yeah, it's interesting from that product angle, because I'm a big believer in your bias, especially if you've been with the product for a while. This happens a lot to founders, especially after early success of their product. They assume they still understand all the customers, even though the customer base has grown. They assume that they've, oh, early on we heard that request, so all we need to do is execute on all the requests now, which is untrue. So you have to work to debias yourself. And I think that means, doing the hard work of connecting with customers, watching them use your particular product. I also really like activities like, Kill the Product Day, where you purposely design a product that could put your product out of the market. I really also believe inviting customers into co-design activities to have them think about, and if you can do it on site with customers, that's great. Or if you can bring them into your company, that's even better, to see different perspectives. And I know this is a simple one, but one great exercise is you're getting too prescriptive if there's only one way to solve the problem. So always challenge yourself to say that if you're working at the right resolution, you should be able to inspire a handful of good ways to solve that problem. If it's a million ways, that means you're probably too high level, right? But if it's only one way, it means you're too low level. So just making that a disciplined thing as a product person, that if you can't go to a room with a bunch of smart people and inspire 5, 6, 8 new ways to solve the problem, you've already made up your mind in your head about what has to happen. And maybe that happens sometimes, but you really need to get in the habit. That's a muscle you need to build all the time. And the same way with music, I have a very talented friend, but his problem was that whatever he just wrote that one time became the song. And I said, listen, you just got to throw away the song. Like, write the song another way, because you can write them. Don't worry, you're never going to be able to write the song. Just write it 3 times if you're that good. And he started to do that, and he started to encourage different ways of thinking about songwriting.
Great insight there. All right, so there's a nice question coming in from Fatima, and that is about. So Fatima is a junior product manager, is asking, how important is it to remember and predict every number, feature, release on the Amplitude chart? So,
oh geez.
what
can you restate? Can you ask it? So is how important is it to know every single number that you're dealing with, like every fact, right? Oof. So let me explain an exercise that I give junior product managers, and I think it will help answer that question. What I ask if I'm coaching a junior product manager to do is to create a mind map that explores the current risks in their product, the opportunities in their product, that basically exposes their current thinking on the product. And I ask them to aspire to keep that up to date almost every week. So I would say put on your calendar every Friday morning, 45 minutes of focus time to update your mental model of the things. and be prepared, because your CEO or VP of product always finds you in the hall and says, what's going on? What do I need to know? And you've done that. But interestingly, the numbers only play one small part of that particular mind map. And so I think that a lot of people, I met a great product manager, and I noticed how effectively she communicated. And I said, how did you do this? And she said, I dedicate time each week to update my own mental one pager for the product. I add a couple numbers that are important. And I also add my assumptions and my bets and my guesses and my things like that. And I practice. That's how I do it. So the answer, I think, to the question is, obsess about the full mind map, and don't over index just on the numbers and the releases and the things like that. And we notice this in Amplitude as well. Like if you use we have a notebooks feature, I'm much more concerned about the product manager diligently keeping that reflecting reality in their thinking than I am like, it's a product. You can just access it. You can find the number. Like, why fill your mind with specific numbers when you could just have it ready to go? I'm much more interested in their thinking versus them knowing every single metric for their product.
I was in mute. All right. So another interesting question coming in. As a musician, when creating an OC, you get stuck in the progression melody and try to bring it back to the chorus. You could use some scales or chord structures. Do you see parallels to this rule approach for product?
I think so. I think we're talking about song structures, and yeah, there's a classic song structure, and you have a verse and certain length, and you have a pre-chorus, and then then you have your chorus, and then you have the shift. Yeah, it's funny. It's almost like we're talking about the sort of form. It might be a little too early for that question, because I could spend an hour talking about song structures in particular thing. No, but what I would say is that the song structure is very interesting, because it is that thing where once Weezer, right? The group Weezer, like, we're really known for like picking apart Beatles songs to understand the physics of songs, right? And they were students of the song. And so the only thing I would add to that particular question is, it's kind of part of the craft of product to understand the different forms and understand why they work, right? Like there's a reason why a pre-chorus launches you into the chorus, right? And then once you understand that, there's lots of ways that you can start playing. You can hint the pre-chorus, you can do the things in the beginning, you can do a refrain at the end. There's more advanced structures. So we could spend forever on the thing, but I think part of this is about being a student of the craft and always being aware of other products. And anytime you can read a blog post where people talk like a teardown of a product, or if you want to pick your own product, or this is going to sound weird. Anytime I start a new product, I run screen share from the beginning. So I used Airtable the other day. I open a screen recording and I do my own recording of the product to try to remember what it's like to see a new product for the first time and see how they're doing the onboarding and see those things. So these are like the lessons. I know it doesn't answer the question, but it just reminded me of some things.
Well, could you delve deeper into the thing that you just said, the example of having the screen share open from the start?
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to remember what it's like to be a new user, right? And anytime I have the opportunity to be a new user, I try to record the fresh take from doing it to challenge myself. And so, if it's about how they do the onboarding flow, or if it's, it's my confusion. It's funny on Twitter, because you'll occasionally see me put things like, I don't know where I am. And what I don't do is I don't put the video I have of me being literally confused. I'm just like, I don't know what to do here. This looks amazing, but I have no concept of what to do. And I think I'm just trying to give you an example of being a student of the form, right? A student of the thing, and building that muscle, I think, is important. It's just like musicians do with songs. We obsess about songs. Like, what are they doing right there? oh, that's interesting. If you watch a musician experience a song for the first time, look at their face, because they do musician face. And musician face is like not just music fan face. Music fan face is like, yeah, that sounds good. Musician face is like, they're playing it in their head like, oh, surprise, like, and so try to build product face. It's like, oh, onboarding sucks. Like you could think of it, you can build the same face if you want.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, so there's one question that I lost. Yeah, okay, pandemic question finally. So, what skills do you foresee PMs would be needing to build on in the sort of remote working world that
Oh,
we're getting?
you just have to become a master facilitator. The thing that worries me about the remote thing is that I think great teams can work really well remote, but they learn, over time to do it. But if you take a highly individualistic work culture with everyone with their own projects and everyone kind of not collaborating, and then you throw them into remote, it's almost turning up the dial to 10 on that level of like not collaborating. So the main skill is dealing with uncertainty and messiness and facilitation. Can you create space in a meeting and get people kind of laughing and thinking? Can you pop open like Miro for something, show Amplitude for something else, collaborate, kind of guide that creative spirit? It's just like, I mean, honestly, a couple of years ago, we started to do more recording remotely. People would record at home for their things, and it took a lot of challenge when you did music doing remotely. Like we would try with video, we would try different things to like get the thing. It's a similar, you need to build a similar skill set to do that.
All right, all right. All right. So another again, taking back to the musician, being wandering musician bit.
I think I have 2 minutes too before I need to jump, so
Sure, sure, yeah. We'll try to, All right. So I'll just have like, okay, how can one save the day after a screw up, right? During a live show,
oh
the feedback is instant, the engagement is evident. If you can see if it's not going well, how do
yeah.
you activate plan B? How do you do it?
So I believe 100% that the number one way to build trust for the designers and developers and other people working in your company is to do a learning review where you guide people open book to what happened. What were the early decisions? Look at your decisions. What data do you have? You did that. You will build so much respect for the people that you work with by doing that, and also start to educate them that our early ideas often don't pan out, that they do that. So I think that the only way you can do that is sort of pick yourself off the ground and use that as an opportunity to kind of, and this is why taking notes and trying to kind of cataloging your thought process is helpful, because when you look back, you don't like, you're not fuzzy about what you believed. You really want to know what you believed 5 weeks ago. You really want to look at the dashboard. You want to look at the particular thing. I do have to head out now for a meeting, unfortunately.
Sure.
So it was amazing chatting with the community. We should do it again. We should set up another one. We could continue talking about this all day.
Absolutely stunning. Great audience questions coming in. And John, thanks a lot for bringing all those insights from your journey. It's been absolutely incredible. I just totally loved it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so did the people, a lot of.
Yeah. There's probably a lot of musicians out there. I've noticed on Twitter, when you look at the what more about me, about people in product, there seems to be this big overlap with people who love music, like music. So yeah, I think at your company, you should have the battle of the bands. And I did that at my company once, and I was blown away that all these people were really good. I thought, what, like you're supremely good musicians. You probably have them at your company right now. You just never knew. Hold on, I need a little bit of food before the next meeting, but yeah.
All right, Sid, last words.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, John and Ujjwal for doing this. It was really nice listening to both of you, and the questions coming in, loved those as well. So thanks everyone for the great participation. I think, yeah, in the end, I do want to call out Ujjwal for sort of helping us set this up, and John for sort of coming in. And then Utkarsh, who's part of our community as well. I think he couldn't join us because of bad internet connection as of now. What we'll do is we'll definitely send everyone and try and send a recording pretty soon, so just so that you have that with you. We'll send you guys a feedback survey, and then do follow Unconventional Geeks on Twitter. Our handle is ugeeks2020. As we bring more sort of events like these for you guys. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot us those questions or reach out to John or Ujjwal on Twitter, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer those.
Absolutely.